Welcome to Field Notes for Pastors, a conversational podcast for pastors and others in ministry as we explore our soul-deep work in the fields of the Lord. Whether you're in a ministry season of fullness or famine, we want to explore themes around Paul's words in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 6. I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow. In today's episode, I'm so thankful to welcome Mandy Smith as we explore various topics, the calling of the pastor, vulnerability, brokenness in ministry. Dr. Mandy Smith is the pastor of St. Lucia Uniting Church in Brisbane, Australia, and a D-Min cohort leader at the Eugene Peterson Center for Christian Imagination. Mandy is an artist and the author of Confessions of an Amateur Saint, the Christian leader's journey from self-sufficiency to reliance on God. She's the author of The Vulnerable Pastor, How Human Limitations Empower Our Ministry, and also of Unfettered, Imagining a Childlike Faith Beyond the Baggage of Western Culture. Mandy and her husband Jamie, who's a New Testament professor, live in their parsonage where the teapot is always warm. That just sounds so inviting. And it is a joy for me to welcome Mandy with us today because her creativity, her humility, her honesty in ministry have inspired me. And because Mandy has been a great encouragement to me in my own study and writing. And welcome to the podcast, Mandy.
Yeah, thanks. It's so good to be with you and good to see you again, Matt.
Thank you. Just wondering if you can, I've done this introduction, but can you maybe just give everybody who's listening a little background, what you're up to now, and perhaps also a little bit of your background in ministry?
Yeah, so I'm the pastor here at St. Lucia Uniting Church. The Uniting Church is a new denomination for me. It's the Presbyterians, Methodists, and Congregationalists combined in Australia in the 1970s. And so it's a bit more mainline denomination than I've grown up with, but there's a lot of things, good things God is doing here. And I was placed here by the denomination to do what they call a work of regeneration. The congregation was really close to closing, very small and tired congregation. And God has done miracles in the past 4 years, and we're seeing a renewal, and we're seeing just a new kind of atmosphere, more diversity in backgrounds and ages, and so it's a really beautiful thing. We're right down the road from the University of Queensland, one of the biggest universities in the Southern Hemisphere, I think, and so just so many opportunities for ministry here. But I'm originally from the Churches of Christ, Christian churches. I was with a kind of a independent Christian church in the US. So I was on staff there for 15 years as associate pastor first and then as senior pastor. But I think my coming into ministry never felt like a straight line and I never really felt groomed for it. In fact, in the context, the place where I studied and where my husband was a New Testament professor didn't feel really, well, it was actively discouraging of women in pastoral roles and preaching roles. And I don't like conflict. I don't like to rock the boat. And yet at the same time, something of the Spirit in me was kind of rocking the boat. And I had to live in that tension between, okay, what is God asking me to do? How does that compare to what God in Scripture seems to be saying and what God in the church around me seems to be saying? And so that I can't mention my ministry process or, unfolding without naming that, because it was a huge part for a very long time of my own discernment and a lot of pain, but also a lot of healing in that place that has really shaped whether I'm talking about that particular thing or not. I had to learn to go to God and to find peace in Him, and that still informs everything that I do every day.
I appreciate you just being real about that and open with that. And I'd love for us to delve into some of those things.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. I've found a lot, maybe like 20 years ago it would have been much more painful, but
Let me start at what might seem a little bit more of a basic place. Just asking this question, what is a pastor?
Yeah.
What would you define the calling of the pastor? And then I'd love to branch off to follow up on some of the things you've mentioned already.
Yeah, that's good. That is the question of the moment. I mean, of one of the many questions of the moment. But for pastors, I think we are having a bit of an identity crisis, aren't we? And in some ways,
Yes.
the thing we feel called to do and the thing we're trained to do looks very different from what people expect of us, the many, many different things people expect of us, and our own fears and expectations that we place upon ourselves. And I think too also some spiritual warfare of lies that kind of are whispered to us in our dark moments. And so for me, one of the books that really helped me with this was The Pastor is Minor Poet, which is Craig Barnes, where he says, the pastor discerns, the pastor pays attention to the subtexts of what's happening in Scripture, of what's happening in our own heart and life, in the life of our community, and listening to God and trying to somehow discern, pay attention. How is God working here? How do all these places where God is working fit together? He is one God. It seems confusing to figure out, and this is probably something that came from my experience of trying to figure out how God is one in me, in Scripture, in the church, with discernment of my calling. It's also a part of the calling to discern, how is God one in the church, in the world, in Scripture, in my heart? And somehow it turns out he is, but it takes a lot of watching on our part. And I think there's a humbling kind of switch that I've had to make in the past of saying, well, God is in conflict with himself, or I'm giving up Scripture because I want to follow what the world is saying about God, or whatever. Like, to have to sit in the humbling posture of saying, well, it seems like God is not one, but I trust that he is. I just mustn't see it yet, and so I've had to learn that in my discernment of my calling, and that has been a gift that's come into my discernment as I lead the church. And so, I would say fundamentally, of course, there are tasks and job titles and descriptions and all that kind of thing, but fundamentally, when I think about how I approach my days, it's a work of paying attention, and I feel myself guarding my energy a lot and guarding my attention a lot. Like, even first thing that I do when I get up in the morning that sets the course for the day, I try really hard not to jump on my phone right away or jump on email right away, but to listen to some music or do a prayer app and go for a walk and be present to the birds and the world and the sky and my own body and the people around me and the dog, and Scripture, and listen to the Lord. And from that, then jump into, okay, what do I need to discern in the congregation, in the community, and in the Word and Scripture for this congregation.
I love just the way you've captured so much just in the ideas of just paying attention. I'm hearing you say the word discernment a lot, discerning, listening, paying attention. It's actually helpful, even what you were just opening up for us to get a glimpse into. What does that look like as you start the day? What does that look like as our phones crowd in on us and call out for our attention with all the notifications that are coming? What was that? I mean, if you kind of keep going on that theme for us just a little bit, as you go into the day, you talked about there are tasks that we do. There's emails to answer, calls to answer, people to visit, a sermon to write. How do you keep that dual attention of attention to God, attention to the congregation, the parish, the tasks? How have you been able to carry that into the course of a day in a meaningful way?
It's interesting that you say dual attention, because it does feel that way, but this kind of peace that I talked about earlier comes from trusting that it feels dual, but it's not actually dual. That the same God at work in me is the God at work in Scripture, is the God at work in my congregation and the broader world. And I can't see him, but I have to trust that the same God is working there and working together for good. And so, it's been an interesting journey the last couple of years to trust that it feels wrong in light of all of the challenges we see, the abuses of power. A lot of Christian leaders are stepping back and saying, "Oh, I don't have authority. I'm not going to push my own ideas." And that's actually my natural instinct. I would not, like, God's have to be like, "No, I'm giving you authority. Embrace it. Don't run away from it." But in the last couple of years, especially if we have to lead change, and especially if that change is going to bring up a lot of conflict or people aren't going to like you, I've really had to embrace the fact that no more than anybody else, but God is at work in me, not just for my own good, but to work through me. And, when you're put in a pioneering place, especially, my posture is to watch what God's already doing in a place and then to just join that. That feels like a humble thing. But there are some times where God puts somebody in a place to bring something new or to start something. And if you're waiting to watch what's already happening there, you might be waiting a really long time. And I felt the Lord say, like, the thing you're waiting for is what I'm asking you to do.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so I put on my desk a quote from William Booth, the founder of the Salvation Army. "I'm not waiting on a move of God. I am a move of God." Which sounds incredibly domineering, but if it's not my choice to be, I am a move of God, but all of us are a move of God, that He invites us. We are a part of the kingdom. We are a part of God's Missio Dei, and it's quite humbling and empowering at the same time to think, I'm a part of what God is doing here. And it's kind of sobering too to be like, well, I better really be careful how to do that, and so somehow that's unifying to think, like, it's not what I sense versus what God's doing elsewhere, but it's the same God, and whatever He's doing in me has to connect with whatever He's doing elsewhere too.
Yeah, it seems like there's some who, we talk about, you were mentioning just the abuse of power and some who need to step back from the domineering. And there's probably other pastors who are even maybe listening to this who it's like, actually, God is inviting you to step forward, to be part of that movement is actually at work within you. I love that. It's a different way of thinking about maybe humility there.
Well, I always want to say something about this because I'm really glad that conversation is happening in the broader church at the moment. And there are some people who need to hear that message, but there are, I think, just as many people, and many of them women, also the introverts and the artists among us, and those who haven't really come through the normal stream of ministry, who are reticent. And for a year or more, when I was first stepping into more leadership, that conversation was so loud around me that it actually caused me to step away from my calling. And it was a great excuse to be like, oh yeah, well, I'll just be quiet and avoid the call of God here, which is like the prophets, And so Jeremiah 1 really has become meaningful to me, where God says, I'm calling you as a prophet to the nations. And Jeremiah says, oh, I'm just a child. You can't ask me to do that. And God doesn't come back the way we'd like Him to and say, oh no, you're really clever and you're really gifted and you've got this great education. God just bombards Jeremiah with I. Like Jeremiah says I. God doesn't say you. God says I. I will call you. I will send you. I will give you the words to speak. I think there's like 8 or 10 different I's that God comes back with. And that's been really powerful for me to just understand that it doesn't matter if we don't feel called to it, but to embrace this call of God. If it feels more like obedience and surrender, I think that's a good kind of authority.
Yeah, that's a great sign, a great test of it, I guess, or a resonance within it. When you think about that, you're talking so much there about the calling of God. I love that reference to Jeremiah. God sort of pushes him forward. Why do you think in this moment it is challenging for pastors and others in ministry to maintain that vibrant sense of calling? I mean, some parts of what we're just talking about is the internal side of that. Maybe that's where we want to talk, and we can do that. Are there other things that you would say that in our present moment make it challenging for pastors to maintain that sense of calling?
Well, I mean, I think it's impossible to be the thing that we think a pastor should be, and also that our entire congregation thinks a pastor should be. It's actually impossible. I think my book, The Vulnerable Pastor, starts with that sentence. It was actually really freeing to finally be able to say, oh, it's not me. This work is actually impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, I think even in its purest sense, with good expectations, it's impossible because we're supposed to need God. Like that's kind of built in.
Right.
That like we're supposed to come to the end of ourselves multiple times a day where I can't fix this problem, I can't answer this question, I don't understand this scripture, I can't resolve all the tensions in the world and the church. And we're supposed to be like, oh, that's right, I'm supposed to trust God here and cry out to him from the desperation. But in addition to that, even, with a healthy model of ministry, there's also these other expectations that the world and the church and we put upon ourselves and that are just impossible, that different people within the congregation will expect different things of us and we can't be all those things, and we feel this tension to be liked by everybody. And there's this strange dynamic where it's not like other places of leadership where basically the people you lead are paid to follow you.
Right. It's not the same.
You do have to kind of manage their expectations and their feelings about you, because otherwise you're out of a job. But at the same time, you're called, and Eugene Peterson talks about this a lot, like you're called to actually be a prophetic presence and to challenge them sometimes. But how do you do that in a way that's not too much challenge where, so it's a very difficult thing to discern. And it actually reminds me a lot of, Thomas Merton talks about true self and false self. Mm-hmm. And the true self is the person God knows. He knows who I am more than I know. And there are so many seeming selves that we put upon ourselves, of like, I want to be liked by everybody. I want to look successful. I want to live up to my mum's expectations of me, or all of the different things that we place upon ourselves. And deep down we know it's a mask. I'm just, there's so many things we do behind the scenes to keep up with things that are impossible. And I think we're actually made for integrity. Mm-hmm. We're made to be true to ourselves, the person God made us to be, and that God actually called to ministry and sees a possibility to use. Mm-hmm. Sadly, that integrity, that lack of integrity reveals itself in our exhaustion, in our mental health, in our relationships, in our physical health. It shows little signs and we often kind of just steamroll right through them. Mm. But I think it's really important to pay attention to our tears and our tiredness and all of those things. And sometimes we just need to push through, but oftentimes those things are a sign that something's happening, and it may mean we need to change our expectations of ourselves, so it may not be just an external thing that needs to change. Sadly, if we push through those things and don't pay attention to them, that's where it blows up and it becomes abusive leadership and burnout and all of those things that we read so much about and we desperately try to avoid. I read so many times or hear on podcasts, how do you avoid burnout? And I don't think that's a helpful approach. How do you, a more positive approach is how do you find and retain your true self?
Yes.
And trust that, small as that is, it might be still a place where God can use it. If I look at my average week, I think I wrote about this in The Vulnerable Pastor, and so many people, it felt so ordinary and a bit humbling to be like, here's all I do in a week. And I was so surprised how many people were like, that was the most helpful part for me to just see the ordinary week of a pastor. Mm-hmm. And, I have a fairly rhythm of most weeks with some spaces built in for some flexibility. And it's surprising that there's not that much in there really. But rest is always protected in there.
Right.
And, Peterson says, get to your calendar before anybody else does. And I love that because I often have a practice of saying, I have plans and nobody needs to know, like being on the couch in my pajamas with my husband is a plan.
They don't have to know what it is.
Nobody needs to know that. No, that's just, I have plans. Sorry. I think Eugene Peterson says my calendar won't allow it.
Yes. He has that wonderful, he had appointments.
Which I love.
Yeah, appointments with great authors and books he was going to read that he kind of penciled into those places. That's beautiful. Yeah. I mean, that whole discussion about the true and false self, and the unity of personhood, I do think is so vital for the pastor, because there are so many expectations coming our way. And I think a lot of people who go into ministry sometimes, I don't want to say we get into it for the wrong reasons, but we are maybe helpers or desire to help people. And some of that sometimes comes out of the bentness of our hearts. Psalm 86:11 is one of my favorite passages. Give me an undivided heart that I might revere your name, O Lord. And that idea of coming to unity, I appreciate how you highlighted the difference. Like talking about burnout, how to avoid it may not be the best approach. Positive is how do we live out of our true selves? Again, you're mentioning lots of different things about that. How, if somebody was listening to this, and is there a mirror you could gently hold up that would help someone know, okay, maybe I'm living out of the false self, maybe I'm living out of the true self? You talked about paying attention to tears and tiredness and things. Anything else that you would want to just show, like, hey, this gives us a glimpse of whether we're living out of the right place?
Yeah, I'm just an intuitive person, so those things are really apparent to me. I don't always know what they mean, but I've often felt really weak because I can be easily overwhelmed, or I need a lot of time alone to process things. And I think it's that my body and my emotions are just telling me things that I've often felt like I have to push those aside so I can just get on with the job. And sadly, the world does not have much space for mess and tears and all that kind of thing. Right. And not that I'm saying we should lead with those unfiltered, unprocessed things, but to take time to really pay attention. This is what Sabbath is for me. I always put pressure on myself for it to be a really happy, beautiful day, and so many times it's quite a hard day. Because I'm having to process the emotions of the week and listening to those instincts that something isn't right. And it may be something that I need to change. It may be something that's going on in the environment around me that I need to talk to somebody else about. Or even discerning, like, do I need to get out of this environment, So, listening to the tears, listening to the exhaustion, listening to the loved ones around us who are saying, hey, something isn't right, I think that's really good to pay attention to. And in the crisis when, ultimately what a beautiful thing that God has built it in, that the false self approach is just not going to work. That all the things, for example, all the things that we do to make other people like us are going to conflict with one another soon and conflict with our need for rest and our need for listening to our own needs. And so when those things hit the fan, I think the thing that has shaped me most to know my true self, and it's an ongoing journey, of course, but the way I see some growth in that area of my life comes from those moments of crisis, hitting a wall, and finding that I did everything that I thought everybody wanted and they still didn't like me, to just come back to the Lord and say, who do you say I am? What are you calling me to do? And this is one of my favorite things about Jesus is that he just had such a sense of himself.
Yes.
And didn't seem to, when somebody was open to him, he was so open and available to them. And as soon as he sensed somebody was hard-hearted towards him or not a safe space, not a person of peace, he didn't go there. And he didn't seem to be bothered about that. He just always imagined him just like having a moment, a spot on the horizon of the kingdom of heaven and just walking straight through it. And there's between him and that is just this ocean that's in tumult of religious junk and political junk. And he just kind of pushes straight through all of it and creates a wake behind him. Anyone who wants to join in gets drawn into that wake. But he doesn't turn aside, and that's what gets him in trouble.
Yeah.
He doesn't turn aside when his path conflicts with whatever other powers are trying to do their thing.
But just utterly himself.
Yeah. And sometimes the process of, we have to kind of learn it by experimentation.
Right. Paying attention to the places where we feel that friction and where things aren't turning out well, and seeing things rise up in ourselves. I know I've seen that so many times where I'm thinking, okay, I'm feeling this. This is telling me something, not just the emotions, but even my responses in those times.
Yeah. And I should just add briefly, I've come across, because I often speak about this when I talk about the Vulnerable Pastor book, and I've come across some folks who have this like real fear of talking about yourself because it just feels like psychobabble or something like that. My call is not to focus on myself, but in order to pay attention well to others, I need to do that work in my own self to clear out what gets in the way. This work is not because the point is for me to be whatever that work is doing in me.
Right.
And yet at the same time, like, how can we imagine that we would help people be whole selves in how God has made them to be if we haven't? Sometimes it's like we're the testing ground. God shows us the path to this, and then we can show others the path of it. So it's not a selfish belly button gazing, what's the word? Navel gazing thing for the sake of it. Like, you have to do that work in order to be available to people, in order to experience in your own life the freedom that God has for you, so that you can, I want my face to light up when I talk about God, and the healing he's done in me. I don't want it to just be a theory. So,
Yeah, that makes sense. I think, we don't have to be afraid of talking about ourselves, paying attention to things. It's not the end, but it is important, especially as pastors. We find ourselves in so many situations where something that's going on may touch something in our own life, our own experiences. And I remember when I was doing clinical pastoral education as part of my seminary training in a hospital, a lot of that was, hey, you walked into this room, what happened? Now we reflect on it. And that was so formative for me, more so than some of my seminary classes, with those experiences and reflections were profound.
Yeah, all pastors should do that. I've not done it myself, but I can imagine it's really helpful. And those moments when, inevitably there's somebody in your congregation who reminds you of how your mum made you feel, or how your teacher mistreated you, or how that bully at school, or, all of the things that it brings up. It's easy to just think, oh, that's ridiculous. But those can be gifts of being like, oh, maybe I need to talk to a counselor or a spiritual director about why that was so difficult for me, what that brought up, and maybe it's an opportunity to be freed from some of that old stuff,
Absolutely.
What a beautiful thing that God allows our healing to somehow go hand in hand with. And that's what I'm finding with this ministry that I'm in now, which just feels like such a miracle to me, that the work that I had to do to help this church walk through so much change really brought up a lot of my own insecurities and my own fear of being disliked. And so somehow, as the congregation is stepping into a new life, I'm finding myself feel more real than I've ever been before. And I've actually had a few people say to me, what's happened to you? Like, I just feel like somebody said to me, you're more real than you've ever been before, So, and I'm like, I feel it.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And ironically, it's from the challenges of having to say, who am I listening to here? What is my ultimate goal here?
You've done a lot of work around this area that almost resonates with what people are saying to you about being more real. The book, The Vulnerable Pastor. I don't know if you're tired of talking about this with people. I mean, even your latest book, Confessions of an Amateur Saint, like you have a gift, I feel like, of transparency that a lot of people sometimes are afraid of, in the sense of sharing in a transparent way or being vulnerable. And it feels like to me you have really seen some beautiful ways that God has worked through what would be vulnerable areas or areas of brokenness. I'm just wondering, why do you think that being vulnerable or broken is a powerful avenue How would you encourage people in ministry to lean into that in some different ways?
Yeah. Well, for me, I think the first title I proposed for that book, authors don't have as much say in the title as they think they should.
No.
As there's marketing people who know more than we do. So there's a reason why they chose The Vulnerable Pastor. But my first title was something like The Human Leader, because it's not just vulnerable in terms of, oh, should I tell people this about myself or not? It's, should I let people watch me be human? Which that's a part of the false self stuff too, that like we feel the pressure to pretend we never get tired and we never run out of ideas, or to pretend we have the answers to everything. Just to be like, it's vulnerable and human to just be able to say, yeah, I don't know what that scripture passage means. Let's look at that together. Like that feels unprofessional for us. We should have all the answers. So it's beyond just like, I'm having a hard day and how do I share that with my congregation and what stories do I tell when I preach? Although that's a part of it. But the interrogation I was doing in that book was coming from just this confrontation that I had with an experience at a conference where there were really good people doing good things, but everybody on the stage, just this leadership conference, everyone on the stage looked so complete and shiny and had all the answers and didn't seem to wrestle with anything. And good for them if that's their actual experience, but I didn't see myself in any of that. And after having been through seminary and prayed and prepared for years for this lead pastor role, I was at this conference and I just had to leave it for 24 hours. I locked myself in my hotel room. It felt like a tomb. That's my memory of it. Like I died. It wasn't just a career crisis. Like it was a personal and faith crisis where I said, you've made a mistake. I've been praying and waiting for this opportunity all these years, Lord. And if that's what leadership looks like, then I can't. I looked inside myself to try to find any sign of anything like that. And there was nothing there. And it was excruciating. And I just felt God saying, in your weakness, I am strong, which felt like a platitude because I understood that as, in your weakness, I'll make you feel strong. But it took me months to realize the call is not for me to feel strong. The call is for me to trust in God's strength, even when I feel incredibly weak and incompetent. And it took me months to realize, oh, I'm an introvert and a woman and an Australian and an artist at a conference that was mostly made up or led by kind of more business-oriented, business-minded men who are American and extroverts. And so, of course, I didn't feel like I belonged there. And it took me months to discern, well, those things that I perceive as weaknesses, God maybe sees unique opportunities to be revealed to the world. But it took me so long to get to that place. And so in addition to, like, yes, we do need to be really discerning about the stories that we tell and how much we let people in behind the scenes, especially when the things are still raw. But at the same time, we have opportunities every single day to just let people watch our need for God. That's what I fundamentally came to discover, is that it's easy for us as ministers to feel like it's our calling to be God for people, to be their strength, to be their answers, to be their hope. And it's actually a delicious moment. I remember feeling it really strongly one time when someone came to be like, oh, Pastor. And I was like, oh, what is this good feeling? I like this. This is delicious. She needs me. She respects me. I could be something here. And it feeds our own egos and our desire to be needed and liked. And we have to wrestle with that in our own selves in order to then lead other people to say, yes, let's look to God together. But it's a lot of wrestling in our own selves. And if we're not self-aware of the deliciousness of that, we will say, okay, yeah, I can be your God. So just that little bit of, that's a huge move for me in my understanding of my call, is to say, oh, I don't have to be God. No wonder it feels impossible. No wonder I'm so aware of my human limitation every single day. I just have to model what it looks like to need God, which is excruciating in its own way. But I often say, I'm not comfortable, but I'm getting used to the discomfort of just being a limited human being in a world that just puts so many demands on us. every advertising campaign basically says something's wrong with you because you haven't figured out your skin problems or your family problems or your financial problems or your weight problems, or whatever. And so everybody else seems to have it all figured out. So just buy this product and you can be successful like them. And I just call God's wallop on that. And like, it's good to be the first person. Sometimes God seems to put me in rooms to be like, I'm the first person sometimes who has to say like, actually, I don't think that's real. and it's just so beautiful to see the freedom that breaks through in other people when you're like, I can't be all of that. Can you really be all of that? Like, let's be honest with one another. And it's an incarnation theology kind of thing too, to be like, and somehow God chooses limited human beings to lead his church and to be his church. Yeah. And there must be some way he knows who we truly are, that we need to sleep, that we get old, that we get sick, that we run out of ideas and energy, and we don't know the future. He knows all that about us, and he's like, I'm asking you to do this. So there must be some way. Yeah.
I love early, I think it's maybe in the first chapter of Confessions of an Amateur Saint, where you actually kind of go through some different situations, just kind of one-liners, and you talk about how in each of these, it's just sort of letting people in on, we need God together. It is about God. It's not about me being God. And I think that's so relieving to a pastor. We don't always have to have the answers, but we can, it sounds trite to say it, we can go together with our church council or with this person who's come to our office, and we can seek God together, and just declaring our need for God. I like the way you kind of even flipped what might be sometimes our interpretation of that passage of Paul. It's not that I feel strong, it's that God's strength is shown amidst in my weakness.
I remember even when I first started as a minister, and I wanted to serve and help everybody, and I love having meetings with people one-on-one where they're sharing ways that they really are struggling or longing to learn and grow. And in the beginning, I would have 3 meetings like that in a day and be absolutely exhausted by the end of the day, because I was taking on their stuff and feeling like now it's my job to carry all this for them and fix them. And something changed when this is kind of a gross image, but when I imagine like they just threw up on the table, and both of us at the end of it are like, okay, God, like, can you clean that up for us? It's not my job, And so when I'm praying at the end of a meeting with somebody, it's not because I've got it all figured out and I'm like, there, let me pray for you. It's me saying like, yeah, this is huge. We both need you, Lord. And I'm giving it to God at the end of the meeting too. Not that I don't care anymore or that I'm not still thinking of them, but to just like let him carry the weight that I'm feeling of whatever they've just shared. And it just makes me, makes the day more doable, makes my daily life more doable. Yeah.
And you're being a companion in the presence of God.
Yeah.
Instead of having to be somehow God or, I don't know what, some great leader we think, and again, most of Moses' ministry was a lot of that, of him just going to God and say, I have no idea what's going on here. Yeah, why did you even bring me here? Right. And letting God lead.
Exactly. And that's modeling for them that they can talk to God anytime. Because if their hope is based on being with me, I'm not always available. At least I shouldn't always be available. And instead, my hope is that they'll learn, I can do that myself anytime. Even when Mandy's resting or sleeping, I don't need her. She's modeled something for me, and it's great that she's available when it's possible. But that's really, I think, when a minister is doing well, is when they're empowering people to be directly going to God.
Yeah, yeah. I could keep going down that road, but I want to get to one other thing, at least with the time that we have. One of the things I've enjoyed about knowing you when you were part of the D-Min cohort that I was part of with some other people, helping lead us in that, you're a very creative person. So you bring your creativity. Many times we'd be someplace and you would be sketching, painting, doing aspects of creative work. And I think that is an aspect of ministry that's very creative as a pastor, but sometimes we're not quite sure how to bring some of that in. That involves some vulnerability, openness, humility. How have you grown in bringing your creativity into your pastoral work? What does that look like in St. Lucia, where you are, in the church there? How has it looked other places? Anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, that's good to name, because it has felt risky. And sometimes, our creativity, the things we create, feel like a part of us, and then to put them out into the world feels very scary because people mightn't get it or like it. And also, I think I had a minister growing up who was a bit of a creative, but the church sometimes felt a little bit like, we don't really want to be swept up in your latest vision. Some of them were rather bizarre. And so maybe there was that in the back of my mind too, of like, this is just my personal thing. I don't want to dump it on my congregation or burden them with this thing I'm trying to do. And I've had people in my congregation be like, no, we want to see that from you, Mandy. But the reality is too that, like, for creatives, I think sometimes the church, people who aren't creatives, I mean, we're all creatives in some way or another, aren't we? But people who don't get artists think of artists as like, but they just paint pretty pictures. Like, we love that. We're going to put that on our website or something, But there's just a way of being that sometimes doesn't feel welcome in the church. And a friend of mine helped me think about this in a different way recently, where she's one of the most creative people I know. And for her, that just means kind of paying attention. It's quite like the pastor's call. She's just paying attention to the Lord. She sits by the river a long time and she prays and she listens to music, and then she finds something emerging, and then she just starts making things. And in the beginning, they're just weird. And then it becomes over like weeks sometimes for her, or months, those things start to become something else. And then she's finally got a product to show to somebody that people are like, oh, that's amazing. But the process is kind of messy, literally and figuratively, and confusing, and she can't control that. You have to kind of give into it. And so that way of being often doesn't feel welcome in the church. And she went to a new congregation and had this idea of something to do that would invite other people in, but it was in that way of like, we're just going to be present together and we're going to watch what emerges, and that's a really spiritual space. But the congregation was kind of like, oh, great, here's the logo for that thing that you're doing, and here's the like website for it, and like launch it today. And she was like, I don't even know what it is yet. Like, let it unfold, which feels deeply spiritual and creative to me. But I get it that like the marketing brain or the strategy brain or whatever wants to name it before it's ready. And so there's for me as a creative, it's partly about like, I'm doing a art project, how can the congregation be a part of that with me? But a big part of it is, I'm not a 5-year plan kind of person. I do long for things in the future, and I do long for us to be a kind of a church, but I'm not like, we will have this many people or we will do this. God's never spoken to me that way, and I'm glad if he speaks to other people that way, but the way he speaks to me is, pay attention today and take the steps I'm inviting you to today, and then tomorrow you'll know the next steps. And that feels very much like the creative process, that sometimes you have a picture in your head and then you just work hard to create that picture. But the really transformative experiences I've had in creating something with art or writing are times where you're not even quite sure what it's going to become, and you yourself are part of the becoming, and that's the really transformative thing that I hope to bring to, well, I'm not bringing the transformative thing, but that we get wrapped up in, that I want to lead in the congregation, that other people are like, whoa, we didn't even know where that was going and we just joined it and look at what it became. Isn't that beautiful to be a part of that? So in some ways that's felt more vulnerable than like, here's an art project that we could do together, or here's something I made that I hope would bless you. It's just that design thinking, which has been good for me to name because I didn't study art in university, but people who do talk, they have a process that they go through that's very comfortable with all of that, that submission to something bigger than themselves. And so it's been good, especially since the church has been so influenced in recent generations by business models that are more like outcome. I have outcomes that I'm oriented towards, which is like, may the kingdom come and God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven, and may more come to know Jesus as a result of what we do here. But I don't always know exactly what shape that's going to take. And it's been really good but vulnerable, because oftentimes in the church, people feel like that's having no plan or being really disorganized. And I really trust in that process in my personal life, and to bring it into my church leadership has been a little bit scary, but it's coming.
I love that. I just want to speak over anybody who listens to this and hears that, just like permission giving to have a, just that creative and developmental, see what emerges, let the process carry you places. For me, it reminds me of some of the things I'm working on with the book related to agrarian images. Like, you can plant and you can sow, but you can't control what's going to come out, or exactly when something's going to emerge from the earth, or when the fruit is going to come on a plant. So I think there is I love that. Again, we're just coming around those themes of attention, paying attention, and seeing what's there.
Yeah, because I think if you make a plan, I actually would love to know exactly what's going to happen. That would really appeal to part of me at the same time. But if I make a plan now, like a 10-step plan that's going to unfold over the next 5 years, what if I learn something in step 2 that totally changes steps 3 to 10? I'm sure you can come back and revisit things, but I love the process of paying attention and learning as we go. And so many times possibilities open up that, for example, we just took out the organ from the church, massive pipe organ that had, was a huge, significant moment to take that out. And it was basically the size of a small room. And, if a traditional church building looks like a cross from the sky, it was one arm of the cross, basically. That was the organ. And it wasn't working, and we weren't using it anymore. And so we removed it, and there was a big hole in the floor, and we hadn't actually planned what was going to come next. And somehow we patched up the floor, and just was an empty space. And then the families of the church just kind of made it their space. So it's, it's close to the front. It's easier for kids to play. It's, it's still very much a part of the space, but it's slightly over to the side. So parents aren't as worried if the kids are moving around more or whatever. And there's an exit that gets them quickly out to the bathroom if they need to take their kids. And it just kind of emerged as this, it's like a little living room kind of area there in the sanctuary, but slightly to the side, that we didn't have a plan. We were just like, well, we know we probably should take this organ out. And now it's probably my favorite space in the church. That kind of just happened as people brought cushions and toys, and now it's this lovely space there, so we would have missed that if we'd planned too many other things.
Yeah. And that's part of the beauty of the artistic process too, right?
Yeah.
It just, sometimes things in the process arise that capture you, and you say, oh, this is now the direction we're going to go with this, whether it's writing or painting or drawing or pottery, I'm sure. So much, Mandy. I'm just really, really grateful for you giving time in this conversation, for being a conversation partner here. I'm sure that there's many different things people might want to follow up on. If people who are listening want to know how to follow what you're doing, where would they look? How would they get in touch with you and keep up with what sort of things you're working on?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at Mandy Smith Hopes, and on Facebook. I have a website that is called thewayistheway.org, and that has my books and some pictures of some of my artwork and all that good stuff. Yeah.
We will make sure I'll put that in show notes just so people can follow up on those sort of things. Just super thankful for the conversation, grateful for the time from halfway around the world to be able to have this conversation. Yeah. Grateful for you.
Good to be together.
Thank you.
Bless you.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Field Notes for Pastors. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with a friend. Give us a like or subscribe to this podcast on platforms where you listen. This podcast is linked with my forthcoming book, The Pastor as Gardener, a renewed vision for ministry, set to be released by Erdman's Publishing on March 24th, 2026. You can pre-order the book anywhere good books are found. And if you do pre-order the book, I have put together some resources as a gift to you. Find out how to access those pre-order resources via my website, mwerickson.com. Until next time, may you experience God's grace wherever God has planted you.